My name is Emily Brooks, and I am 31 years old. Exactly 3 weeks before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, my mother called me. She did not ask how the seating chart was going. She did not ask if my dress fitting went well. She simply said my wedding needed to wait. My 26-year-old sister Bella had just gotten engaged, and she wanted her engagement party on my wedding weekend. Before I could process the demand, my father took the phone. "Your wedding is just a party," he snapped. "Do not be selfish, Emily. We are going to Bella's party." I held the phone against my ear, listening to his breathing. I did not argue. I did not cry. I just whispered, "I get it," and hung up. 5 hours later, my mother had left 27 voicemails. By the final message, she was sobbing. My fiancé, Julian, sat on our couch, sipping his coffee with a quiet smile. He turned his laptop screen toward me. "They Googled my name," he said. "My parents thought Julian was just a mid-level office worker. They had no idea who he really was, what he owned in our state of Connecticut, or that they had just insulted the one man holding the keys to their entire financial future." Before I tell you exactly what my husband revealed to them, welcome to Grape Vengeance. Please tell me your age and where you are watching from in the comments below. I always love seeing who is joining me for these stories. Let me take you back to the moment the phone rang. It was a Tuesday evening. I stood in my kitchen staring at a clipboard full of confirmed RSVPs. The caterer needed the final head count by Friday. When my mother Susan called, her name flashed on the screen and my stomach tightened. I wiped my hands on a towel and answered. "Hi, Mom," I said. "I was just finishing the caterer numbers." "Cancel the caterer, Emily." Her voice carried the flat, instructional tone she used when speaking to retail employees. "We need to push your date. Maybe aim for next spring. Or just go down to the courthouse." I stopped moving. The pen slipped from my fingers and hit the granite counter with a sharp clack. "What do you mean? Bella got engaged last night." My mother sighed as if explaining basic math to a child. Derek gave her a stunning ring in Aspen. She wants to celebrate on the 18th. The 18th was my wedding day. Mom invitations went out 2 months ago. Deposits are paid. We are getting married on the 18th. "Derek has senior partners flying in from London," she replied. "He operates in high-level finance, Emily. We cannot ask his firm to rearrange international travel just so you and Julian can serve cheap chicken at a local banquet hall." I looked at a framed photo of Julian on my shelf. We met at a quiet coffee shop in Stamford. He drove a 5-year-old sedan and wore plain sweaters. To my parents, he was invisible. My father, Richard, owned a regional hardware supply business and valued people strictly by their bank accounts. Because Julian did not wear designer watches or boast about his portfolio, my parents treated him like a failure. Derek, on the other hand, was everything they valued, flashy, loud, and constantly bragging about his investments. "She can have her party the following weekend," I told her. My voice stayed steady. My mother let out a sharp breath. "This is why Bella is so exhausted by you. You turn everything into a competition. Julian is a nice boy, but let us be realistic. You two do not need a spectacle. Bella and Derek do. Their social circle expects a certain standard." I heard a rustling sound over the line. Then my father's voice cut through. "Emily, listen to me," Richard sounded annoyed. "I know what your mother asked you, and she is right." "Dad," I started, "she is asking me to cancel my wedding for a cocktail party." "Your wedding is just a party," he said. The words hit me hard in the chest. Bella's engagement is a networking event. It matters for Derek's career. It matters for our family image. Stop being selfish for once in your life. If you want us there when you marry Julian, pick another weekend. He did not wait for my answer. He did not ask how I felt. He just delivered his terms and expected me to shrink. I had spent 31 years shrinking. I looked at the RSVP list. They had confirmed their attendance 6 weeks ago. Now they were discarding me. "Did you hear me, Emily?" my father demanded. I took a slow breath. The familiar sting of rejection washed over me, but this time it left behind a cold clarity. "I get it," I whispered. I tapped the red button on my screen. The line went dead. I stood alone in the kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. I did not throw my phone. I simply opened my contacts. I found my mother's number and hit delete. I found my father's number and hit delete. They had made their choice. Now I was going to make mine. Deleting those numbers felt like cutting a heavy anchor chain. I stood in the center of my kitchen, the screen of my phone glowing in the dim light. For my entire life, that phone was a leash. Susan Brooks would tug and I would follow. Richard Brooks would bark an order and I would comply. Now there was just an empty contact list. My thumb hovered over the glass, waiting for the familiar surge of guilt. It never came. Instead, a bone-deep exhaustion washed over me. I leaned against the granite counter and closed my eyes. The memories played back a highlight reel of every time I had been pushed aside. They did not begin with my wedding. This pattern was woven into the fabric of our family long before Julian ever bought a ring. I thought about a sweltering June day 13 years ago, my high school graduation. I had spent 4 years studying late into the night, earning my place near the top of my class. As I sat in the stuffy gymnasium in my rigid cap and gown, I kept scanning the bleachers. I found my parents near the aisle. My father was checking his watch. My mother was fanning a 13-year-old Bella. When the principal called my name, I walked across the stage. I smiled, holding my diploma out toward the crowd, waiting for a camera flash or a cheer. I saw nothing. After the ceremony, I pushed through the sea of celebrating families searching for my parents. I found them in the parking lot, already sitting in my father's running SUV. I knocked on the window. My mother rolled it down an inch. "Bella has a sore throat," Susan said. The air conditioning in that gym was giving her a chill. "We need to get her home and make tea." I stood there in my graduation gown, holding my hard-earned diploma. "But Mom," I said, "parents are taking pictures by the football field. We were supposed to go to dinner to celebrate." "Do not be insensitive, Emily," Susan snapped. "Your sister is sick. You already walked across the stage. You have the piece of paper. We are leaving. Find a ride home with a friend." The window rolled up. My father put the car in drive and pulled away, leaving me standing alone on the asphalt. I spent my high school graduation taking a single photo with my biology teacher before walking 2 miles to my house. When I arrived, Bella was sitting on the living room rug, eating a large bowl of ice cream and watching television. Her sore throat had vanished. My father handed me a $20 bill and told me to order a pizza. That was the lesson. Bella's minor discomfort outweighed my major achievements. My sister figured out the formula very early. Whenever the spotlight shifted toward me, Bella would manifest an illness, a sudden crisis, or a new passion that demanded immediate parental intervention. Susan orchestrated these shifts with precision. My mother thrived on chaos. She loved playing the role of the devoted caretaker to her fragile, talented younger daughter. And Richard financed the entire production. My father threw his money at Bella to keep Susan happy, and he demanded my silence to keep the house quiet. 4 years later, the pattern repeated. I stood on a university lawn in New Haven. It was my college graduation. I had worked 2 jobs to pay my tuition. I earned a degree in business administration, securing a job offer before I even took my final exams. I sent my parents the schedule 3 months in advance. An hour before the ceremony began, my phone buzzed. It was Susan. "We are not going to make it," she said. The background noise sounded like a busy street. I gripped the phone tightly. "You are not coming." "You promised you would be here by 10. Bella has an audition," Susan replied, her voice filled with frantic excitement. "A local theater company is casting a summer play." She woke up having a severe panic attack about her monologue. I had to drive her down here to calm her nerves. "Your father is taking us to a nice lunch afterward to celebrate her bravery." I stared at the stage being set up across the lawn. "Mom, I am graduating from college. I am the first person in our family to get a degree." "Oh, please," Susan sighed. "You always exaggerate. It is just a state school, Emily. Bella is putting herself out there. She is vulnerable. She needs her family right now. You are tough. You will be fine. Take some pictures and email them to us." They skipped my college graduation for a community theater audition. Bella did not even get the part. But she got a celebratory dinner, a new designer handbag from my father, and the satisfaction of knowing my day had been ruined. I ate a stale sandwich at a campus cafeteria, surrounded by other students, laughing with their proud parents. I opened my eyes, pulling myself back to the quiet reality of my kitchen. The clipboard with my wedding RSVPs sat next to my hand. I traced the check marks next to their names: Susan Brooks, Richard Brooks, Bella Brooks. They had RSVP'd yes, but I knew the truth. They never intended to show up for me. They were just waiting for Bella to provide a better option. Derek proposing was the perfect excuse. I realized then that Bella did not just want an engagement party. She wanted my specific weekend. She wanted the thrill of bumping me out of my own life. She wanted to prove once again that she was the golden child and I was the acceptable sacrifice. I looked at the blank contact screen on my phone. The anger I expected to feel was absent. The desperate urge to fix things, to beg for their approval, was gone. I was just tired. A deep, heavy fatigue settled into my bones. I was tired of fighting for a place at a table where the chairs were always pulled away. I was tired of being told my milestones were just parties, while Bella's tantrums were emergencies. I set the phone down. I took a breath, and the air felt different, lighter. I finally understood the truth. I was an orphan. I had 2 living parents who resided just 40 miles away, but I was an orphan all the same. They had never been my protectors. They had never been my cheerleaders. They were just people who shared my last name. The front door unlocked. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. Julian was home. He walked into the kitchen, shedding his simple gray coat. He looked tired from a long day at work, but the moment his eyes met mine, his posture shifted. Julian always noticed when something was wrong. He never missed a detail. He walked over, wrapping his arms around me. He smelled like winter air and the roasted coffee he liked to drink on his drive home. He pulled back his hands, resting on my shoulders. His dark eyes scanned my face. What happened? I looked at this quiet, steady man. He did not boast. He did not demand the center of attention. My parents thought he was a nobody. They thought he was a low-level office worker struggling to pay rent. They treated him with barely disguised pity, often suggesting he should take career advice from Derek. Julian always took their insults with a calm smile, never rising to the bait. I glanced at the clipboard, then back to my fiancé. My parents are not coming to the wedding, I said. My voice was steady. Julian did not gasp. He did not ask what I did wrong. He simply watched me, waiting. Bella got engaged last night, I continued. Derek proposed. She wants her engagement party on the 18th. My mother told me to cancel the caterer and go to the courthouse. My father told me not to be selfish. Julian's expression remained perfectly still, but his eyes darkened. A subtle shift in his jaw was the only sign of his reaction. He reached out and gently closed the clipboard. Did they ask to move the venue, he asked. His voice was low, smooth, and dangerously calm. No, I said. They just told me my wedding is a party, and Derek's connections are more important. They told me they are going to Bella's celebration. I expected Julian to offer sympathy. I expected him to hug me and say we would have a beautiful day without them. Instead, Julian stepped back. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The quiet office worker vanished, replaced by something much sharper. Julian tapped a number on his screen. He held the phone to his ear, his gaze locked on mine. I watched him, realizing how little my family actually understood about the man standing in my kitchen. Marcus, Julian said into the phone, I need you to make a call. We have a change in plans. Marcus was not a friend from the neighborhood. He was not a buddy from a bowling league. Marcus was the senior executive assistant at Sterling Holdings, and Julian was not an office drone. He was the chief executive officer and majority shareholder of that exact company. My family did not know this. They looked at Julian and saw a man who drove a 6-year-old Honda sedan. They saw a guy who wore unbranded gray sweaters and faded denim jeans. When they asked what he did for a living, Julian always gave the same polite, vague answer. He told them he worked in property management. My father, Richard, who thought running a regional hardware supply chain made him a titan of industry, immediately dismissed Julian as a low-level clerk. I met Julian 2 years ago at a quiet coffee shop in Stamford. I had just dropped a stack of design folders, sending papers scattering across the floor. He knelt down, gathered my work, and handed it back with a warm, genuine smile. We started talking. He did not boast about his income. He did not flash a luxury watch. He asked about my day, and he actually listened to the answer. We fell in love in quiet moments. 6 months into our relationship, he brought me to a secure office building in downtown Hartford, swiped a black key card, and took me to the top floor. That was the day he told me the truth. Julian Sterling owned a ruthless commercial real estate and private equity firm. His company practically controlled half the commercial districts in Connecticut. He owned shopping centers, luxury residential developments, and corporate high-rises. His net worth was staggering. But Julian had grown up surrounded by wealth, watching people use his father for money and status. When Julian took over the company, he wiped his personal life from the public eye. He wanted to find a partner who loved him for his character, not his bank account. I kept his secret easily. His peace of mind mattered far more to me than proving my worth to my superficial parents. I let them think I was marrying a struggling clerk. Their judgment peaked at a family dinner just 3 weeks ago. Susan had insisted we all meet at an upscale steakhouse to celebrate Derek getting a new client. Derek showed up wearing a tailored suit that looked too tight across the shoulders. He sported a flashy gold watch and spoke loudly enough for 3 tables to hear him. Bella sat beside him, casually resting her hand on the table to show off a new diamond bracelet. Julian wore his usual dark sweater. He sat quietly, sipping sparkling water. Halfway through the meal, Derek leaned across the table, swirling a glass of expensive red wine. "So, Julian," Derek said, his voice dripping with condescension, "still pushing papers at that management company?" Julian met his gaze smoothly. "I handle a few properties, yes." Derek chuckled, glancing at my father for approval. "You know, man, you really need to learn to hustle. The real money is in aggressive investments. You cannot just sit in a cubicle waiting for an annual raise. You have to take risks. If you want, I could look over your portfolio, maybe find you some mutual funds so you can actually take Emily on a decent honeymoon." Bella giggled behind her napkin. Susan offered a sympathetic sigh as if my choice of partner was a tragic burden on the family name. Julian did not flush with embarrassment. He did not defend himself. He just offered a mild, pleasant smile. "I appreciate the advice, Derek. I will keep that in mind." When the waiter brought the check, the total was astronomical. Derek suddenly patted his pockets, claiming he left his wallet in his other jacket. Richard conveniently looked out the window. Without a word, Julian slipped his hand under the table, passing the waiter a solid black credit card. He paid the $3,000 bill, tipped 50%, and let Derek walk out of the restaurant feeling like a financial genius. Julian later told me he considered that meal an investment. He paid $3,000 to confirm exactly what kind of fool Derek really was. Now standing in our kitchen, Julian ended his call with Marcus and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He walked over to the kitchen island and picked up my clipboard. He scanned the list of guests, his eyes lingering on the names of my parents and my sister. He did not raise his voice. He did not punch a wall or throw a glass. Men with actual power never need to shout. They simply shift the board. "Are you okay?" Julian asked, his tone softening only for me. I let out a long breath, feeling the tension drain from my neck. "I am fine. I think I have known they would do this for a long time. I was just waiting for the excuse." Julian set the clipboard down. He walked into the living room, opened his laptop on the coffee table, and woke the screen. I followed him, watching his fingers fly across the keyboard. The glow of the monitor highlighted the sharp angles of his face. He pulled up a series of internal corporate files, documents filled with property deeds, subsidiary holdings, and financial leverage reports. "My father told me I was being selfish," I said, leaning against the door frame. "He told me Bella's engagement is a networking event. It matters for their image." Julian stopped typing. He looked at me, his dark eyes calculating and cold. Your father builds his image on a foundation of sand, Emily. He values the appearance of wealth because he is terrified of being exposed. Julian returned his attention to the screen. He opened a secure email client and drafted a quick, precise message to his legal team. He did not tell me what he was writing, but I could see the reflection of a spreadsheet in his eyes. "What did you tell Marcus to do?" I asked. Julian closed the laptop with a soft click. He leaned back on the couch, resting his arms on his knees. He looked at the framed photo of us on the shelf, the one taken the day we got engaged in the rain. "I told Marcus to flag every account associated with Richard Brooks and Derek Vance," Julian murmured. "I told him to pull the subsidiary records for the venues in this county." My heart skipped a beat. What does that mean? "It means we wait," Julian said. A slow, dangerous smile curved the corner of his mouth. "Your family thinks they hold all the cards because they believe money dictates respect. They think they can discard you without facing any consequences." He stood up, crossing the room to stand in front of me. He reached out gently, tucking a stray lock of hair behind my ear. His touch was warm, a sharp contrast to the freezing reality he was about to unleash on my parents. "We are not going to yell at them," Julian promised softly. "We are not going to beg them to attend our wedding. We will not send angry text messages or demand apologies." "Then what are we going to do?" I whispered. Julian looked down at me, his eyes gleaming with a quiet, terrifying certainty. "We are going to let them dig their own graves," he replied. "And when they hit the bottom, we will be the ones holding the shovels." I shivered, but not from fear. For the first time in my life, someone was standing between me and my family, ready to absorb their toxic behavior and reflect it right back. The phone in my pocket stayed silent. My parents thought they had won. They thought I was sitting in the dark, crying over a canceled caterer. They had no idea the ground beneath their feet had just cracked wide open. I did not know exactly what Julian owned, but I knew the storm was coming, and I knew, for the very first time, I would not be the one getting wet. The next morning, I woke up feeling a strange sense of peace. Deleting my parents from my phone gave me a quiet shield. I poured a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen island, ready to finalize the floral arrangements. Julian was working from his home office down the hall. The house was silent. Then my phone chimed with a new email. I glanced at the screen. The sender was Thomas Harrison, the general manager of the Oak Grove Country Club. This was the venue I had booked 14 months ago. It was a beautiful estate with rolling green lawns and a stone patio where Julian and I planned to say our vows. I opened the message. The subject line read, "Urgent Scheduling Update." "Dear Ms. Brooks, we regret to inform you that due to an unforeseen administrative error, your reservation for the 18th has been canceled. A double booking occurred in our system. Because the other party secured their contract with a premium deposit, we must yield the space to them. Your initial payment will be refunded to your card within 3 business days. We apologize for the inconvenience." My chest tightened. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt too warm. I read the email 3 times, trying to make the words change. "You do not accidentally double book a wedding 3 weeks before the date." I picked up my phone and dialed the country club. The front desk transferred me to the manager. Thomas Harrison answered with a tense, practiced tone. "Mr. Harrison," I said, keeping my voice steady, "this is Emily Brooks. I just received your email. I signed my contract over a year ago. You cannot cancel my wedding 21 days before the event." "Ms. Brooks, I truly apologize," he stammered. His voice sounded thin, like a man reading from a script he did not believe. "We had a system glitch. A very important VIP client requested the estate for that exact weekend. They offered a substantial financial incentive that the ownership board decided to accept. My hands are tied." "Who is the client?" I asked. "I cannot disclose that information," he replied quickly. He did not need to. My phone buzzed against my cheek. Another incoming call. The caller ID displayed a number I had deleted just 12 hours ago, but I still knew the digits by heart. It was my mother. I hung up on the manager and answered Susan's call. "Hello, Emily," Susan said. Her voice dripped with thick, artificial sympathy. It was the exact tone she used whenever she was about to deliver terrible news, disguised as a favor. "What did you do?" I asked. Susan let out a soft, theatrical sigh. "I just heard the unfortunate news about Oak Grove. Such a shame about their scheduling error. But honestly, it is for the best." My knuckles turned white as I gripped the granite countertop. "You went to my venue." "Bella just fell in love with the stone patio," Susan explained, sounding entirely too cheerful. "We drove past it yesterday after she got her ring. She decided it was the perfect aesthetic for her engagement photos." Derek called the manager this morning. He has significant connections in local real estate, you know. He offered them double your deposit to secure the date. Money talks, Emily. The venue recognized a priority client when they saw one. The room spun. Bella was not just competing for my family's attention anymore. She was actively hunting down my joy and destroying it. This was her signature move. When I was 17, I saved money from a summer job to buy a beautiful blue dress for my senior prom. I hung it on my closet door, so proud of earning it. Bella, who was 12 at the time, threw a screaming fit because she wanted to wear blue to her middle school spring dance. Susan forced me to return my prom dress so Bella could have the color all to herself. My mother was doing it again. She was holding my arms behind my back so my sister could steal my life. "You bribed my venue to cancel my wedding," I stated. The sheer cruelty of the act took my breath away. "Do not use such ugly words," Susan scolded. "Derek simply made a better business proposition. I told you yesterday to go to the courthouse. Do not be stubborn. Take the refund, buy a nice white suit, and let your sister have her moment. We will see you at the engagement party." She hung up. I lowered the phone. A cold wave of panic crashed over me. I had 21 days. I had a caterer, a florist, and a photographer, but no place to put them. My family had weaponized their wealth to erase my wedding day. I sank onto a bar stool, resting my forehead against my hands. I did not cry. Crying was a luxury for people who had someone to catch their tears. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Julian walked into the kitchen holding an empty coffee mug. He stopped halfway across the room. He took one look at my pale face and set his mug down on the counter. "What happened?" he asked. His voice was firm, grounding me instantly. I looked up at him. "My mother just called. Bella and Derek went to Oak Grove Country Club. Derek bribed the manager with double my deposit. The venue just emailed me to cancel my contract. They are giving my wedding date to my sister for her engagement party." Julian did not flinch. He did not offer empty platitudes about finding a better location. He tilted his head slightly, his dark eyes narrowing. "Oak Grove," Julian repeated. "Yes," I said, my voice shaking just a fraction. "Derek told the manager he has real estate connections. They kicked me out." A sharp, humorless laugh escaped Julian's lips. "Derek's connections are a joke." Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He did not look angry. He looked like a predator watching a mouse walk directly into a trap. He tapped a contact and held the phone to his ear. "Marcus," Julian said. I watched him, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Pull the corporate portfolio for the hospitality division," Julian ordered. "Look up the holding structure for Oak Grove Country Club." Julian met my gaze across the kitchen island. He offered a slow, reassuring nod. "Yes, that one," Julian continued into the phone. "Find the direct line for Thomas Harrison. He is the general manager. Call him right now. Tell him the chief executive officer of Sterling Holdings is reviewing his quarterly performance. Tell him if he refunds Emily Brooks, he will be clearing out his desk before lunch. Instruct him to void the contract for Grape Vengeance and ban him from the property." Julian paused, listening to his assistant. "Make sure Harrison understands who Emily is," Julian added softly. "Then have him call her back." He ended the call and slid the phone onto the granite counter. He picked up his coffee mug and walked around the island, pulling me into a tight embrace. "They do not own that club, Emily," he whispered against my hair. "I do." Sterling Holdings acquired the parent corporation of Oak Grove 3 years ago. Your sister just tried to bribe an employee inside my own building. I pulled back, staring at him in shock. You own my wedding venue. I own the ground it sits on, he corrected gently, and nobody cancels my wife. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. The caller ID showed the front desk of Oak Grove. I answered, putting the call on speaker so Julian could hear. Ms. Brooks? Thomas Harrison practically shouted through the speaker. His voice was trembling. He sounded like a man who had just looked over the edge of a cliff. Yes, Mr. Harrison, I replied. I am so incredibly sorry. He stammered his words, tripping over each other. There has been a catastrophic misunderstanding, a terrible error on my part. Your reservation is completely secure. We are locked in for the 18th. What about your VIP client? I asked, glancing at Julian. Julian leaned against the counter, his expression unreadable. The manager swallowed loudly enough for me to hear it over the line. That contract has been shredded. Their deposit is being returned immediately. They will not be utilizing our facilities for their event. Please accept my deepest apologies. I am upgrading your reception package to include complimentary premium champagne for all your guests. Thank you, Mr. Harrison, I said. I expect to see you on the 18th. Yes, ma'am, he squeaked. Have a wonderful day. The line clicked off. The heavy, suffocating panic that had gripped my chest vanished, replaced by a surge of pure adrenaline. Bella had tried to crush me, and Julian had swatted her away with a single phone call. I picked up my phone and opened my text messages. I typed a new message to my mother. I kept it brief. Oak Grove just called me. They rejected Derek's bribe. My wedding is back on. Do not contact me again. I hit send. I did not mention Julian. I did not mention Sterling Holdings. Let them think Derek was not as powerful as he pretended to be. Let them think they simply lost a bidding war. The secret of my husband's wealth remained locked away, waiting for the perfect moment to detonate. I sent the message to my mother and set the device face down on the counter. Silence filled the kitchen again. Julian returned to his home office to handle his morning conference calls. I sat alone thinking about the bribe. Derek tossing cash at a venue manager felt so typical of his arrogant nature. But my father financing that lifestyle raised serious questions. Richard Brooks always presented himself as a titan of local commerce. He built a regional chain of hardware supply stores across 3 counties. Growing up, he made sure everyone knew exactly how much things cost. He loved walking into a room and complaining about his tax brackets, ensuring his neighbors understood he paid more to the government than they earned in a decade. When I rented my first apartment, Richard refused to help me carry boxes. He stood in the center of my tiny living room, running a finger along the cheap drywall. He told me I was settling for mediocrity. He reminded me that at my age, he was already securing his second commercial lease. He measured love in dollars. Because I chose a modest career in business administration instead of joining his corporate hierarchy, he deemed my life a failure. Yet he never hesitated to swipe his platinum credit card for Bella. If she wanted a new luxury vehicle, a European vacation, or a designer wardrobe, Richard opened his wallet without blinking. So where did all this endless cash come from? I booted up my personal laptop. I started searching public records for my father's business, hunting for any recent property sales or strange corporate filings. Before I could dig deep into the state registry, Julian walked back into the kitchen. He held a thick manila folder in his right hand. He placed it softly onto the island, right next to my coffee mug. "What is that?" I asked. Julian took a seat beside me. When I had Marcus pull the subsidiary records for the country club, I also asked him to run a background check on Derek and a financial audit on your father. I stared at the thick folder. Julian, you did not have to do that. Julian tapped the cardboard cover. Your parents tried to steal your wedding venue using Derek's supposed wealth. I needed to know exactly who we were fighting. Open it. I peeled back the cover. The top page displayed a summary report generated by Julian's accounting division. I scanned the numbers and my breath caught in my throat. Brooks Hardware Supply was not a thriving empire. It was a sinking ship. The profit margins had collapsed 3 years ago. Revenue was down across all 5 store locations. Vendors were issuing late payment notices. My father was drowning in red ink. I flipped to the next page. It contained copies of commercial loan agreements. Richard had borrowed heavily against his own inventory and the equity of his flagship store. But these were not standard bank loans. The interest rates were predatory, hovering near 25%. He had taken out short-term capital advances designed for desperate business owners facing imminent collapse. Why would he take these loans, I asked, tracing the staggering monthly payment amounts with my index finger. He cannot afford this. The business is barely covering payroll. Keep reading, Julian instructed quietly. I turned the page and found a ledger of wire transfers. My stomach turned. The borrowed capital did not go into store renovations or marketing campaigns. The money flowed directly into personal accounts. Richard had transferred $50,000 to Bella just 6 months ago for her lavish summer trip to Italy. Another $70,000 went straight into a limited liability company registered under Derek's name. The description read, "Seed capital for startup investments." My father was destroying his life's work to fund my sister's delusions of grandeur. Derek was not a successful finance genius. He was bleeding my father dry, using my family as a personal piggy bank, while mocking my fiancé for driving an older sedan. Richard was risking foreclosure to keep Bella draped in designer clothes, terrified that if he stopped paying, his golden child would throw a tantrum. I reached the final document in the folder. It was a standard notice of debt assignment. The original predatory lender had bundled a series of high-risk commercial loans and sold them to a larger private equity firm. I traced my finger down the page to find the name of the new creditor. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked up at Julian, my eyes wide. "Sterling Commercial Credit," I read aloud. Julian nodded, his expression giving away nothing. "It is a secondary tier debt purchasing firm. My holding company acquired them 2 years ago." I looked back at the paper, the reality of the situation washing over me. "You own my father's debt." Julian laced his fingers together on the counter. "When your father missed his last 2 payments, the account was flagged for collection. My executives were preparing to initiate foreclosure proceedings on his hardware stores next Tuesday. I halted the filing when I saw the name on the account. The man my father treated like garbage owned the very ground he stood on. Richard Brooks spent years belittling Julian, calling him a failure, mocking his modest clothes. My father had just commanded me to cancel my wedding to please a man who was quietly pushing him toward bankruptcy. All Julian had to do was snap his fingers, and my father would lose everything. The hardware stores, his reputation, his false image of immense wealth, it would all vanish overnight. If you found out you held the keys to your toxic family's financial ruin, would you use them? Tell me in the comments. Would you pull the trigger immediately, or would you wait? I stared at the foreclosure notice. I felt the immense weight of the power resting in my hands. One word to Julian, and the collection agents would lock the doors of Brooks' hardware supply. My parents would be humiliated. Bella's endless cash supply would dry up instantly. Derek's fake startup would collapse. It was the perfect trap, built entirely by their own greed and ignorance. But I did not want to destroy my father just for the sake of causing him pain. Despite a lifetime of neglect, a tiny, foolish part of my heart still hoped Richard Brooks might wake up. I wanted to know if he was capable of being a real parent, or if he was truly nothing more than an automated teller machine for Bella. Julian watched me carefully. "Tell me what you want to do, Emily. I will sign the foreclosure authorization right now, or I will bury the debt indefinitely. It is your choice." I closed the manila folder. I slid it across the granite counter, pushing it back toward Julian. "Do not file the papers yet," I said. Julian raised an eyebrow. "You want to let him off the hook?" "No," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "I want to give him a choice. My wedding is in 20 days. If my father shows up, if he walks me down the aisle and chooses me over Bella's cocktail party, We will figure out a way to restructure his debt. I will help him save his business." "And if he does not show up?" Julian asked softly. I looked at the framed photo of my college graduation, remembering the stale sandwich I ate alone while my family celebrated a failed theater audition. "If he chooses her engagement party over my wedding day," I said, "then he is not my father anymore, and you can collect every single penny he owes you." Julian offered a slow, approving nod. He picked up the folder and tucked it under his arm. "We will wait," he agreed. The trap was set. My father had 20 days to prove he possessed a shred of decency. He was walking on a tightrope, blindfolded, convinced he was the smartest man in the room. He had no idea his entire empire rested in the hands of the daughter he had spent 31 years throwing away. I poured my cold coffee down the sink and started drafting the final seating chart for the reception. I created a special table near the front, placing name cards for Susan, Richard, and Bella. I left the chairs empty, wondering if they would remain that way. The venue was secured, the debt was exposed, and the clock was ticking down to the 18th. I just had to wait and see if my family would dig their graves deep enough to bury themselves. My text message landed like a grenade inside my parents' house. I did not hear the initial explosion, but I certainly felt the shockwave. 2 hours after I informed my mother that Oak Grove rejected Derek's bribe and my wedding was back on the retaliation campaign, officially began. My cousin Sarah, who always enjoyed a front row seat to our family dysfunction, called me before lunch. I answered the call while addressing invitation envelopes. Sarah spoke in a hushed, frantic whisper. She told me she had just stopped by my parents' house to drop off a casserole dish. She walked into a war zone. Bella was pacing the living room hardwood, shrieking at the top of her lungs. According to Sarah, my sister shattered a crystal vase against the fireplace bricks because she could not comprehend a world where her money was refused. Derek was marching through the kitchen, yelling at some low-level assistant on his mobile device, demanding to know who outbid him. Susan did not discipline Bella for destroying the living room. Instead, my mother directed her rage at the only target she ever used: me. The first text arrived at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It was from Aunt Martha, my father's older sister. Martha had spent decades enabling my parents' behavior. When we were children, Martha always bought Bella expensive electronics for Christmas, while handing me a generic gift card. Her message flashed across my screen. "Emily, I am deeply disappointed in your behavior today. Your mother is in tears. You are acting like a spoiled bridezilla. Bella just wants to celebrate her beautiful ring, and you are intentionally sabotaging her happiness out of pure spite. You need to apologize and let her have that venue." I read the words twice. I did not type a response. I set the device back on the table. 30 minutes later, Uncle Greg chimed in. Greg was Susan's brother, a man who survived 3 divorces and still felt qualified to give relationship advice. His message was shorter but equally cruel. Stop punishing your sister because she found a successful man. Your petty jealousy is tearing this family apart. Grow up. My chest tightened, a familiar ache radiating through my ribs. The gaslighting was breathtaking. Bella and Susan had marched into my venue. They had tried to bribe an employee to steal my date and evict my vendors. Yet somehow, I was the villain. I was the jealous monster trying to ruin my sister's magical moment. They were utilizing a tactic they had perfected over 30 years. In my family, reality was entirely optional. The truth was, whatever made Bella look like a victim and painted me as the aggressor. By 3 o'clock, the private text messages evolved into a public execution. Susan logged onto Facebook. She did not just write a status update, she published a manifesto. My screen buzzed with notifications as distant relatives and family friends began tagging me in the comments. I opened the application and read my mother's post. "A mother's heart breaks when she watches one child refuse to support the other," Susan wrote. "We raised our daughters to celebrate each other's victories. Sadly, some children grow up harboring deep resentment. Bella is experiencing the most joyful week of her life, but we are currently dealing with a shocking level of selfishness from someone who should be her biggest cheerleader. Please keep our family in your prayers during this difficult time. We just want peace." She attached a photograph of Bella wiping a fake tear from her eye, showing off her 4-carat diamond ring to the camera. The comments poured in immediately. Church members, neighbors, and old high school acquaintances left heart emojis and offered their condolences. They praised Susan for her strength. They called Bella a beautiful angel, and they condemned the unnamed jealous sister. If I were younger, I would have taken the bait. When I was 20, I used to write long, desperate paragraphs defending myself. I would explain my side of the story, pleading for someone to understand the truth. That always made things worse. Toxic families weaponize the word drama. They strike a match, throw it into your bedroom, and when you run out coughing from the smoke, they point at you and tell the neighbors you are being dramatic. They demand a reaction so they can punish you for reacting. I refused to give them the satisfaction. I closed the social media application. I turned off my notifications. I walked into the kitchen, boiled a kettle of water, and brewed a cup of chamomile tea. Julian walked in a few minutes later, noticing the tight set of my jaw. He did not ask questions right away. He simply leaned against the counter, watching me stir honey into my mug. "They are circling the wagons," I told him quietly. "Aunt Martha called me a bridezilla. Uncle Greg said I am jealous of Derek's success. My mother just posted a public prayer request on the internet, asking God to cure my selfishness." Julian let out a dry, humorless laugh. He picked up his own coffee cup. "They are putting on a spectacular show for an audience that does not matter." "Should I respond?" I asked, looking down at the dark liquid in my mug. Part of me wants to post the screenshot of the venue's cancellation email. I want to show everyone what they actually did. Julian shook his head slowly. "Never interrupt your enemy when they are making a mistake, Emily. If you argue with them, you validate their delusion. Silence is the only weapon a narcissist cannot counter. Let them scream into the void. It will drive your mother insane." He was right. I carried my tea into the living room and sat on the couch. I picked up a wedding magazine and flipped through the glossy pages. I did not defend myself. I did not block them. I just became a ghost. By evening, my stoicism had the exact effect Julian predicted. Susan thrived on conflict. When she lobbed a grenade, she expected a surrender flag or a return fire. Being ignored was the ultimate insult. It meant she had lost control of the narrative. At 7:15, my mobile device rang. The screen illuminated with Susan's name. I let it ring. It stopped, then immediately started ringing again. She called 4 times in rapid succession. I did not answer. Finally, she left a voicemail. I waited 5 minutes before accessing the recording. I pressed play, resting the speaker on the coffee table so Julian could hear it too. Susan's voice did not carry the fake, sugary sweetness she used for her public posts. It was raw, guttural, and dripping with venom. "You listen to me, Emily Brooks," she snarled. "You think you are so clever ignoring your family. You think because you manipulated some country club manager you have won. You are nothing. You have always been nothing but a bitter, mediocre disappointment. Your sister is marrying a man who builds empires, and you are tying yourself to a nobody. I am ashamed to share a bloodline with you." I stared at the device, my heart maintaining a slow, steady rhythm. The words were cruel, but they lacked their usual power. They just sounded desperate. "Since you refuse to act like a daughter," Susan continued, her voice rising to a shrill pitch, "I refuse to be your mother. You are formally disowned. Do you hear me? Nobody from this family will be attending your pathetic little party. Richard and I will not be there. Martha will not be there. Greg will not be there. You can walk yourself down the aisle. Do not call us. Do not show up at our house. You are dead to this family." The recording ended with a sharp click. Silence blanketed the living room. The finality of her words hung in the air, heavy and dark. For 31 years, I had bent over backward, trying to avoid that exact speech. I had surrendered my prom dress, skipped my own graduation dinners, and swallowed my pride 1,000 times just to keep Susan from cutting the cord. Now she had done it anyway, over a venue booking. Julian looked at me. His expression was impossible to read, a mixture of deep sorrow for my pain and cold calculation for his next move. I picked up the phone. I did not hit delete. I tapped the screen and saved the audio file to my secure cloud drive. I created a new folder, labeled it Wedding Day, and dropped the vicious voicemail inside. "That is a good insurance policy," Julian noted softly. "It is not insurance," I replied. My voice was calm, stripped of all grief. "It is a mirror. One day they are going to try and pretend this never happened. When they do, I'm going to hold this up and force them to look at their own ugly reflection." I locked the screen and placed the device in a desk drawer. The smear campaign was designed to break my spirit. Instead, it set me free. They had promised not to attend my wedding. They had promised to stay far away from my pathetic little party. I knew those promises would evaporate the second they discovered who Julian truly was. My parents loved money far more than they hated me. The trap was fully primed. Now we just had to wait for Bella to run her inevitable background check. Tuesday morning arrived with crisp, clear skies. Exactly 72 hours remained until I walked down the aisle. I stood in the guest bedroom, gently guiding a warm garment steamer over the delicate lace of my wedding gown. The house felt incredibly peaceful. Julian was currently at his downtown office finalizing a complex corporate acquisition before taking extended time off for our honeymoon. I was humming a soft tune, enjoying the rare, golden silence of a drama-free morning when my cell phone vibrated across the wooden nightstand. The caller ID displayed Sarah. My cousin had always been the quiet, watchful observer in our family tree. While Susan and Richard showered Bella with lavish praise and expensive gifts, Sarah often sat in the corner during holiday dinners, watching the blatant favoritism with a knowing, sympathetic gaze. She lived just 2 blocks from my parents and frequently stopped by their house for morning coffee. She possessed a talent for blending into the wallpaper, making her my only reliable informant inside enemy territory. I pressed the green answer button and placed the device on the dresser, switching on the speaker setting. "Hello, Sarah," I said, keeping my eyes focused on a stubborn wrinkle near the hem of my dress. "Emily, are you sitting down?" Sarah whispered. Her voice trembled with a potent mixture of raw shock and barely contained glee. "I am currently hiding near the coat closet in your parents' hallway. The entire household just imploded." I turned off the steamer. The sudden quiet amplified Sarah's frantic breathing through the tiny speaker. "What happened?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe, crossing my arms over my chest. Sarah painted the scene with vivid, razor-sharp details. Bella was seething. My strict refusal to argue online had starved my sister of the attention she craved. Furthermore, Derek was pacing the kitchen floors, nursing a severely bruised ego over the country club rejection. Derek told Bella that Julian must have taken out a predatory payday loan to secure the venue. Derek insisted Julian was likely drowning in terrible credit card debt, faking his financial stability just to impress me. Bella needed ammunition. She wanted to humiliate Julian publicly. She wanted to uncover a terrible credit score, a past eviction notice, or a hidden bankruptcy filing. She wanted to print out the proof, bring it to her upcoming engagement party, and mock my choice in a husband in front of their wealthy friends. Bella carried her silver laptop to the granite kitchen island. Richard sat nearby, grimly reviewing his past-due vendor invoices with a red pen. Susan hovered near the sink, arranging decorative fake flowers while nodding along to Derek's constant insults. Sarah watched from the shadowy hallway as Bella typed 3 words into the search engine: Julian, Sterling, Connecticut. She slammed the enter key, expecting to find a low-level property management directory or a collection agency warning. Instead, the internet shattered their false reality into a million jagged pieces. The search engine did not return a struggling office clerk. It returned thousands of verified financial news links. The top organic result was an extensive profile published by a premier business journal. Sarah read the headline to me over the phone: "Tech and real estate titan Julian Sterling expands his empire." Bella stopped breathing. Her manicured fingers froze over the trackpad. She clicked the image tab. High-resolution photographs flooded the glowing screen. Julian, wearing a bespoke charcoal suit cutting a ceremonial ribbon at a prestigious charity gala. Julian, standing confidently in front of a towering glass skyscraper bearing his corporate logo. Julian, shaking hands with the state governor. He was not wearing faded denim or cheap sneakers. He possessed the quiet, commanding presence of a man who literally owned the city. The second link caught their attention. It detailed a recent corporate buyout. Sterling Holdings acquires Regional Country Club Group. Bella gasped, finally realizing why the manager at Oak Grove had rejected Derek's bribe and upgraded my reception package. My fiancé owned the ground Derek tried to buy, but the true devastation arrived a heartbeat later. Richard heard the name Sterling Holdings. Sarah told me my father dropped his reading glasses onto the hardwood floor. The lenses cracked, but he did not notice or care. He staggered out of his chair and shoved Bella aside to stare at the glowing monitor. He scrolled rapidly down the page, scanning the corporate umbrella structure. His eyes locked onto the subsidiary list. Sterling Commercial Credit. Richard recognized the name of the exact subsidiary holding the paper on his failing hardware stores. He recognized the entity that charged him exorbitant interest rates. He recognized the shadow corporation currently threatening him with imminent foreclosure. The crushing weight of his choices crashed down upon him. The debt he utilized to fund Bella's European vacations and Derek's fake startup ventures was owned by Julian. The man Richard called a failure, the man Richard ordered me to abandon, was the sole owner of his financial executioner. Sarah described my father's face turning the color of wet ash. His hands shook so badly he could barely grip the edge of the kitchen island. Susan noticed the rising panic and asked what was wrong, complaining that Bella looked faint. Richard turned to his wife, his voice cracking under the strain of pure terror. He whispered the truth. He confessed that they had just formally disowned a billionaire. He admitted that Julian Sterling owned the debt on their business, and with one single phone call, Julian could seize their house, their luxury cars, and their stores. I stood in my quiet guest room listening to Sarah relay this chaos. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I felt a profound, chilling vindication. For 31 years, my father equated human worth with financial leverage. He worshipped money above his own flesh and blood. Now the deity he prayed to had arrived to pass judgment. Sarah said Bella began sobbing hysterically. Bella realized her shiny diamond ring and Derek's leased sports car were cheap plastic toys compared to Julian's generational wealth. Derek just stared at the screen, his fragile ego crumbling into dust. Just weeks ago, Derek had leaned across a steakhouse table and offered to teach Julian how to hustle. Derek had offered to review Julian's mutual funds. Derek finally understood he had tried to lecture a shark on how to swim. The power dynamic in my family shifted in the blink of an eye. They were no longer the wealthy, untouchable aristocrats casting out a disobedient daughter. They were desperate, drowning debtors who had just spat in the face of the only man holding a life preserver. Sarah promised to keep her phone close and update me if they made a move. She ended the call, leaving me in the comforting silence once again. I picked up my garment steamer and neatly wrapped the power cord. I walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and poured myself a tall glass of iced water. I took a slow sip, letting the cool liquid soothe my dry throat. I looked at the calendar pinned to the corkboard. 3 days left. The silent test I had set for my father was over. The trap had snapped shut. They finally knew exactly who I was marrying. Now the real desperation would begin, and my phone was about to become the busiest device in the state of Connecticut. The digital clock on my microwave displayed 10:45 when a sharp chime pierced the morning quiet. My cell phone rested flat on the cool kitchen island. The screen lit up, flashing a string of numbers I recognized instantly. Susan was calling. Just yesterday, my mother declared I was a bitter disappointment. She told me I was dead to our relatives. Now she was trying to reach me. I did not reach for the device. I leaned against the counter, watching the bright rectangle glow until the incoming call routed to the automated answering service. 3 minutes passed. A notification pinged. A new voicemail awaited in my inbox. I tapped the speaker icon. Susan's voice filled the room. She utilized an artificial, sugary tone I had not heard directed toward me since I was a toddler. "Emily, honey, it is Mom," she chirped. Her pitch was unnervingly high. "There has been a silly misunderstanding. We were all just feeling a bit stressed yesterday. Wedding planning makes everyone so tense. Please call me back so we can smooth this over. I love you so much." The recording concluded with a soft click. I stared at the dark screen. She loved me. 31 years of cold shoulders, skipped graduations, and stolen birthdays. But a single internet search magically manufactured a devoted mother. The phone buzzed again. Then again. By noon, the device vibrated continuously, sliding across the granite surface like a trapped moth. In my entire adult life, my parents rarely returned my calls within a calendar week. If I needed a ride from the airport or help painting a living room, my father always cited his grueling business schedule. My mother often claimed her social calendar was too packed to grab a simple cup of coffee. Yet within a window of 5 hours, they discovered the time to dial my number 27 times. I picked up the ringing phone and carried it into the living room. Julian sat on our gray sofa, reviewing a quarterly earnings report on his tablet. He held a ceramic mug of dark roast coffee. He glanced up as I set the buzzing device onto the wooden coffee table. "They figured it out," I told him. Julian took a slow sip of his beverage. A cool, calculating smile touched his lips. "Play the messages," he suggested. "Let us hear what they have to say." I unlocked the screen and pressed play on the accumulated audio files. We sat together, listening to the desperate, real-time unraveling of the Brooks family hierarchy. Message 4 featured Susan using a stern, guilt-inducing tone. "Emily, ignoring your mother is incredibly immature. We are trying to build a bridge here. Bella feels terrible about the venue mix-up. Pick up the line right now. Do not hold a grudge." Message 8 showcased a rising, undeniable panic. The strict authority vanished. "Emily, please. Your father is experiencing chest pains from the anxiety you are causing him. We need to speak with Julian. Tell him we want to host a lovely dinner for you both tonight. Our treat. We can go to the finest restaurant in town." I looked at Julian. He raised one dark eyebrow, silently mocking Derek's previous attempt to pay a steakhouse bill. The sudden offer to buy us an expensive meal felt remarkably pathetic. They were trying to throw pennies at a man who owned the bank. By message 12, their false pride shattered entirely. Susan's voice wavered, thick with unshed tears and breathless desperation. "Emily, we made a terrible mistake. Bella is canceling her engagement party. We told Derek to push his event to next year. We are coming to your wedding. We want to be there for our beautiful daughter. Please tell the country club manager we are attending. We are family. Family sticks together through thick and thin." I paused the playback. A strange, heavy sensation settled deep within my chest. It was not grief. It was not joy or triumph. It was a profound, hollow emptiness. For decades, I believed my family treated me poorly because I was inherently defective. I thought I lacked some specific quality that made Bella worthy of their endless adoration. I assumed I was not smart enough, pretty enough, or talented enough to earn their respect. I spent countless nights staring at my bedroom ceiling, wondering how to fix my personality so my parents would finally choose me. Listening to Susan beg for an invitation she had viciously rejected just 24 hours ago provided the ugly, undeniable truth. I was never the problem. My character never mattered. My loyalty held zero value. They only cared because of the vast bank account attached to my future husband. If Julian drove a delivery truck, I would still be disowned. Because Julian owned a commercial real estate empire, I was suddenly their beautiful, cherished daughter. Their love was a simple transaction. I just never held the correct currency. Until today. I tapped the glass, resuming the audio playback. We skipped through several frantic hang-ups, muffled arguments in the background, and breathless pleas until we reached the final recording. Message 27. This time Richard spoke. My father did not project the booming, confident voice of a self-made local business tycoon. He sounded broken. He sounded like a terrified old man standing on the edge of a crumbling cliff. Emily Richards choked out. A ragged, wet sob echoed through the receiver. I had never heard my father cry in my entire life. Please, sweetheart, pick up the phone. I need to talk to Julian. It is a family business matter. There is a huge misunderstanding with a holding company. I can explain everything to him. I am losing the supply stores, Emily. They are going to take everything I built. You have to save me. You are my daughter. I need you. The line went dead. Julian set his coffee mug down on a cork coaster. He did not gloat. He did not offer a smug remark. He looked at me with deep, unwavering support. His quiet presence provided a safe space for my reaction. I took a deep, cleansing breath. The hollow emptiness inside my ribs evaporated, replaced by an immense, unshakable peace. The invisible chains that bound me to their approval snapped. I did not owe them a financial rescue. I did not owe them a comforting explanation. They had constructed their own fiscal prison, utilizing predatory loans to finance a fake, lavish lifestyle. I was just the person refusing to post their bail. I picked up my phone. I navigated to the power settings. I did not type a reply. I did not send a text message confirming their venue access. I swiped the red slider across the screen. The device powered down, fading to black, plunging the Brooks family into absolute, impenetrable silence. I enforced the ultimate boundary. No contact, no negotiations, no second chances. There is nothing more satisfying than watching a bully realize they picked a fight with the wrong person. I placed the deactivated phone into a desk drawer and closed the wooden panel. The quiet test I established for my father was officially over. Richard proved he only wanted to walk me down the aisle to secure a debt pardon. He failed the test. He chose Bella's vanity over my dignity, and now he would reap the bitter harvest of his own choices. My wedding day was rapidly approaching. I knew my silence would not stop them from trying to force their way back into my life. Desperate people do not respect boundaries. They crash right through them. By ignoring their endless calls, I practically guaranteed they would show up at the country club gates demanding entry. They would bring their fake smiles and their tacky, manufactured apologies, expecting me to fold in front of my guests. Let them come, I thought, turning back to Julianne. We had less than 72 hours left. We were going to have a beautiful, luxurious ceremony, surrounded by people who genuinely cared for us. And if my toxic relatives decided to crash the front gates, they would finally meet the real Julianne Sterling. The billionaire they threw away was waiting for them. The morning of the 18th arrived with bright sunshine and a gentle breeze blowing off the nearby lake. I sat inside the bridal suite at Oak Grove Country Club. The spacious room featured vaulted ceilings, antique mirrors, and plush velvet seating. It smelled like fresh-cut roses and expensive lavender perfume. My phone remained switched off, tucked away deep inside my leather travel bag. I did not experience any last-minute panic. I did not field any screaming voicemails from Susan. I did not have to manage Bella throwing a tantrum over her makeup or her wardrobe. I just listened to the soft, elegant sounds of a string quartet warming up on the stone patio directly below my open window. The makeup artist brushed a light layer of powder across my cheeks. She told me I looked remarkably calm for a bride. I smiled at her reflection in the glass. I was calm because I had finally cut the heavy anchor weighing me down. The heavy oak door opened with a soft click. Catherine Sterling walked into the room. She was Julian's mother. She possessed the kind of quiet, understated grace that old money often brings. She wore a simple, elegant navy blue gown that fit her perfectly. Catherine did not demand attention when she entered a room. She earned respect through genuine kindness and deep empathy. During my childhood, Susan always criticized my appearance before major events. Susan would pinch my waist and suggest I skip dinner, or she would fix my hair and sigh loudly in deep disappointment. Catherine did the exact opposite. She walked up behind my chair and placed her hands gently on my shoulders. She looked at our reflection in the large vanity mirror. She smiled warmly, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "You look breathtaking, Emily," she said softly. My son is the luckiest man in the state of Connecticut today. Welcome to our family." I thanked her, feeling a sudden thick lump form in my throat. Catherine did not know the full, ugly extent of my parents' cruelty, but she knew they had abandoned me today. She stepped in to fill that void without ever being asked, offering the maternal warmth I had craved for 3 decades. A firm knock sounded at the door a few minutes later. Marcus entered the bridal suite. He was accompanied by a tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a dark tailored suit and a discreet earpiece. This was the head of private security for the country club. Marcus introduced the man as David. I reached into my purse and handed David a printed sheet of paper. It contained 3 clear recent photographs and 3 specific names: Richard Brooks, Susan Brooks, Bella Brooks. I looked directly into the security director's eyes, keeping my posture straight and my voice firm. These individuals are not permitted on this property under any circumstances. They might claim to be my parents. They might claim there is a medical emergency. They might try to offer you a cash bribe or threaten your employment status. David took the paper and folded it neatly. He slipped it into his interior breast pocket. "Nobody gets past the iron front gates today, Ms. Brooks," he assured me. Mr. Sterling gave us very specific, strict instructions regarding these 3 individuals. "You have nothing to worry about. We have extra guards stationed at every perimeter entrance and roaming the parking areas." The music shifted from a light classical piece to a slow, deliberate bridal march. It was time. I left the bridal suite and walked toward the edge of the manicured green lawn. The outdoor seating area was filled with 100 guests. These were Julian's relatives, his close childhood friends, and his trusted business associates. There were no empty seats reserved for my toxic relatives. The chairs I had mentally set aside for them were gone, removed by the venue staff at my request. Usually, a father walks his daughter down the center aisle. He gives her away to her new husband. My father had disqualified himself from that honor. He chose a networking opportunity over my dignity. I gripped my bouquet of white orchids and took my first step onto the fabric runner alone. Walking by myself was not a symbol of loneliness. It was a profound declaration of personal independence. I did not need Richard Brooks to validate my existence. I did not need Susan Brooks to approve of my choices. I belonged to myself. I walked with my head held high, my shoulders pulled back, feeling the warm sun on my face. The guests stood up, offering warm, supportive smiles as I passed their rows. At the end of the aisle stood Julian. He wore a custom-tailored black tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. He did not look nervous. He looked like a man who had finally found the one thing his immense wealth could never buy. As I walked closer, I watched his dark eyes. They held a fierce, unwavering loyalty. My entire life, my family looked right past me to check on Bella. They treated me like disposable background scenery. Julian looked at me like I was the only breathing person on the planet. When I reached the altar, he took both of my hands in his. His grip was warm and grounding. "You look perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. We stood together under a tall wooden archway woven with white roses and green ivy. The officiant spoke about the meaning of love and enduring partnership. Then it was time for our personal vows. I looked into Julianne's eyes, speaking loud enough for the seated guests to hear every single word clearly. For 31 years, I believed family was defined entirely by shared blood. I thought loyalty was a rigid obligation owed to the people who raised you, regardless of how terribly they treated you. You showed me a different path. You taught me that true family is actively chosen. You taught me that real love does not require me to shrink myself or apologize for existing. Today, I am choosing you. I am choosing the family we will build together, a family based on mutual respect and unbreakable trust. Julian squeezed my hands. His voice carried a deep, resonant certainty that echoed across the quiet lawn. "Emily, you spent your life protecting yourself from the people who should have guarded your heart. You will never have to fight alone again. I vow to be your shield. I vow to prioritize your peace above all else. I choose you today, tomorrow, and for the rest of our lives. He slid a heavy diamond band onto my ring finger. I placed a solid gold band onto his hand. The officiant pronounced us husband and wife. Julian pulled me close and kissed me. The guests erupted into loud, joyful applause. Catherine wiped a happy tear from her cheek. Marcus clapped enthusiastically from the front row. A heavy, physical weight lifted off my chest in that exact moment. The deep-seated anxiety I had carried since childhood dissolved into the warm afternoon air. The fear of never being good enough vanished. I was Emily Sterling now. I was protected by a man who possessed both the financial leverage to ruin my abusers and the strong character to prioritize my healing. We turned and walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand. The string quartet played a joyful, upbeat melody. The reception awaited us inside the grand ballroom of the estate. The venue staff carried silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of premium champagne and delicate appetizers. The catering team began preparing a 5-course meal that smelled of roasted garlic and fresh herbs. A jazz band began setting up their instruments on the main stage. The floral centerpieces were immaculate. The lighting cast a warm golden glow over the polished dance floor. Everything looked flawlessly executed. We took our seats at the sweetheart table, surrounded by laughter and genuine celebration. My new in-laws stopped by our table to offer hugs and congratulations. It was the drama-free, loving environment I had always dreamed of experiencing. I watched Catherine laughing with her friends, realizing this was my new normal. But beneath the surface of my joy, a quiet, steady alarm hummed in the back of my mind. I took a sip of my cold champagne, watching the heavy wooden doors at the far end of the room. Toxic people do not care about security blacklists. Narcissists do not accept rejection quietly, especially when their lifestyle is threatened. I knew my parents were staring down the barrel of total financial ruin. I knew their predatory loans were due. I knew they were drowning in a desperate, suffocating panic. And desperate people always make a scene. The peaceful environment was beautiful, but the dark storm was gathering just outside the front gates. The reception carried the effortless energy of a room filled with people who had nothing left to prove. The jazz band played a smooth, lively melody from the corner stage. Waiters in crisp white uniforms glided across the polished hardwood floor, carrying silver trays of seared scallops and crystal glasses filled with sparkling water. I sat beside Julian at our sweetheart table, watching the joyful scene unfold. For the first time in my adult life, my shoulders felt light. I was not anticipating a sudden insult. I was not scanning the room to see who Bella was currently offending. I was simply enjoying a perfectly prepared meal with my husband. Julian reached across the white linen tablecloth and rested his hand over mine. His thumb traced the smooth edge of my new gold ring. He smiled at me, a genuine expression of deep contentment. Across the room, Catherine raised her glass in a silent toast, her eyes shining with warmth. Several high-profile guests, including regional mayors and chief executive officers of rival firms, mingled near the bar. They spoke in hushed, respectful tones, treating our celebration with the dignity it deserved. The atmosphere was flawless. The protective barrier we built around our special day held strong, keeping the toxicity of my past firmly outside the estate walls. Then I saw David. The head of private security moved through the crowded ballroom with quiet, deliberate urgency. He did not run, but his long strides ate up the distance between the main entrance and our table in seconds. He navigated around a group of laughing guests, keeping his hands loosely clasped in front of him. His expression remained professionally neutral, but the rigid set of his jaw signaled an immediate threat. The peaceful illusion of the reception fractured. The dark storm I knew was coming had finally reached our shore. David stopped beside Julian. He leaned down, speaking in a low, controlled baritone designed to carry under the jazz music without drawing attention from the nearby tables. "Mr. Sterling," David said, keeping his gaze locked on my husband, "we have a developing situation at the main security gate." Julian did not drop my hand. He took a slow sip of his water and set the glass down. Define the situation, Julian replied. 3 individuals are currently blocking the primary access road, David explained. They match the photographs provided on the restricted guest list. Richard, Susan, and Bella Brooks. They arrived in a rideshare vehicle and are refusing to clear the entry lane. My guards asked them to vacate the premises immediately, but they became highly combative. My stomach plummeted, but the cold, steady presence of Julian kept me anchored to my seat. I looked at the security director. Are they trying to force their way inside? I asked. David nodded, turning his attention to me. Yes, ma'am. They are causing quite a disturbance. They are demanding VIP treatment. Susan Brooks is threatening to contact the local authorities, claiming we are holding her hostage by refusing to open the gates for the mother of the bride. Bella Brooks is screaming at my staff because her shoes are sinking into the decorative gravel. I felt a bitter, humorless smile tug at the corner of my mouth. They were standing outside a billionaire's private estate, throwing a childish tantrum over footwear and bruised egos. What exactly do they want? Julian asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. David cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable relaying the sheer audacity of my relatives. Richard Brooks is demanding a face-to-face meeting with you, sir. He brought a large leather briefcase. He keeps telling my guards that he possesses an urgent business proposal that will benefit your holding company. He insists you will want to see his financial ledgers tonight. Furthermore, they brought a massive gift box wrapped in metallic gold paper. They tried to hand it to my lead guard, claiming it was a peace offering and demanding we grant them immediate access to the ballroom. The sheer magnitude of their delusion left me momentarily speechless. They did not come to apologize. They did not come to watch me celebrate my marriage. They came to pitch a business deal. My father dragged his failing company ledgers to my wedding reception, hoping to corner Julian near the open bar and beg for a debt pardon. Richard believed he could buy his way out of foreclosure with a tacky, oversized gift and a desperate handshake. Susan and Bella were playing their assigned roles perfectly. Susan weaponized the title of mother whenever it suited her agenda, demanding special privileges she never earned. Bella complained about her own minor discomfort while attempting to ruin my most important day. They had spent decades treating me like an annoying burden, and now they expected to waltz into my luxury reception and drink premium champagne on my dime. I listened to David describe their attire. They were not dressed for a high society evening. Richard wore a poorly fitted rented tuxedo that looked cheap against the elegant backdrop of the country club. Susan squeezed into an outdated sequined dress she normally wore to local charity bingo nights. Bella chose a flashy, overly revealing gown that screamed for attention, desperately trying to outshine everyone else, but ending up looking remarkably out of place. They were playing dress-up, trying to mimic a level of wealth and sophistication they could never comprehend. Julian shifted in his chair. He released my hand and placed both of his palms flat against the table. He prepared to stand. Instruct the local police to dispatch a cruiser, Julian ordered David. Have them arrested for trespassing and disturbing the peace. I want them removed in handcuffs. A month ago, I would have panicked at those words. The old Emily would have hidden in the restroom crying over the embarrassment of having her family arrested. The old Emily would have begged Julian to let them inside just to avoid a public scandal. I spent my entire youth managing their explosive emotions, sacrificing my own peace to keep their fragile image intact. But the old Emily died the moment my father called my wedding a selfish party. The scapegoat was gone. The woman sitting at the sweetheart table owned her power. I reached out and placed my hand firmly over Julian's wrist, stopping him from rising. "No," I said quietly. Julian paused. He looked at me, his dark eyes searching my face for any sign of hesitation or fear. He found nothing but cold, hardened resolve. "Do not call the police yet," I instructed David. Julian frowned slightly. "Emily, you do not have to endure this. They are trying to use your wedding as a corporate boardroom. I will gladly throw them in a holding cell. They deserve the humiliation." "They deserve to hear the truth directly from me," I replied. My voice did not shake. My hands did not tremble. If we just have them hauled away, they will spend the next 10 years playing the victim. Susan will tell the entire extended family that your cruel security team assaulted them. Richard will claim you cowered away from a brilliant business deal. Bella will post endless stories about how we ruined her night. They will write their own fictional narrative. I am going to deny them that opportunity. I pushed my chair back and stood up. The heavy silk of my wedding gown rustled softly against the floor. I looked down at Julian. He recognized the shift in my posture. He saw the fierce independence radiating from my expression. He nodded slowly, a look of immense pride washing over his sharp features. Julian stood up beside me. He did not try to take over the situation. He simply aligned himself at my side, a silent, powerful guardian, ready to back my play. I turned my attention back to the security director. David stood waiting for his final orders. Keep the police on standby, I told him, but do not engage with them anymore. I will handle this. David nodded respectfully. Understood, Mrs. Sterling. Hearing that name sent a fresh surge of adrenaline straight through my veins. I was no longer the discarded daughter of Richard and Susan Brooks. I was a Sterling. I possessed the legal and emotional backing to crush their toxic entitlement once and for all. I reached out and took Julian's hand. His grip was steady and reassuring. We stepped away from the sweetheart table, leaving the joyous music and the clinking glasses behind us. We walked out of the grand ballroom and entered the long, quiet corridor leading toward the front entrance of the estate. The heavy oak doors swung open as we approached the night air. The cool evening breeze hit my face, carrying the faint sound of Susan screaming my name in the distance. The walk down the paved driveway felt like the final steps of a long, exhausting journey. Every pebble crunching beneath my shoes represented another memory of their abuse. My ruined prom dress, my lonely college graduation, the venomous voicemail, the predatory loans. It all led to this exact moment. The ultimate confrontation was waiting just beyond the iron gates, and I was finally ready to tear their false empire straight down to the ground. The paved driveway stretching toward the main entrance felt like the longest walk of my life. My heels clicked against the smooth asphalt in a steady, rhythmic cadence. Julian matched my stride perfectly. He did not rush. He did not drag his feet. He walked beside me like a shadow cast in solid steel. Ahead of us, the towering wrought iron gates of Oak Grove stood closed, flanked by 2 stone pillars. The yellow glow of the security lamps illuminated the chaotic scene playing out on the other side of the metal bars. My parents and my sister stood on the decorative gravel shoulder of the access road. They looked exactly as David described, but seeing their desperation in person struck a different chord. Susan tugged at the hem of a tight, outdated sequin dress that caught the harsh security lights. Richard clutched a thick leather briefcase to his chest like a life preserver. He wore a rented tuxedo that bunched awkwardly at his shoulders. Bella shifted her weight from foot to foot, her thin stiletto heels sinking into the dirt. She wore a bright red gown featuring a plunging neckline. They did not look like the wealthy elite family they spent decades pretending to be. They looked like strangers, trying to sneak into a party they could never afford. When we stepped into the pool of light, Susan noticed us first. Her entire demeanor shifted in a fraction of a second. She dropped her scowl, replacing the angry grimace with a wide, artificial smile. She shoved past David and threw her arms wide open, rushing the iron bars as if she could squeeze her body right through the metal gaps. "Emily, my beautiful daughter," Susan cried out. Her voice dripped with thick, manufactured joy. "We are so happy to see you. Tell these awful guards to open the gate. We brought gifts." She reached her hands through the bars, her fingers grasping the empty air, waiting for me to step forward and accept her fake embrace. I stopped walking. I stayed exactly 2 feet out of her reach. I did not raise my voice. I did not display any anger. I just looked at her, keeping my posture straight and my hands resting loosely at my sides. I stepped back and raised one hand, palm facing outward. "Stop right there," I instructed. The words cut through the cool night air with surgical precision. Susan blinked, her smile faltering. Emily, honey, it is freezing out here. Tell them to unlock the doors. We want to celebrate with you and Julian. I tilted my head, studying her face. I thought my wedding was just a party, I stated. My tone remained flat, devoid of any warmth. I thought I was being selfish for expecting you to show up. Richard flinched. The words I used belonged to him. He recognized the exact phrase he threw at me over the telephone weeks ago. He pushed Susan aside and stepped up to the gate. He abandoned the fatherly facade instantly. He did not look at my face. He did not apologize for missing the ceremony. His panicked eyes darted straight past me, locking onto my husband. Julian Richards stammered, raising his voice to carry over the iron bars. Son, please, there is a terrible misunderstanding happening here. He thrust the thick leather briefcase forward, pressing it against the metal gate. I have all my financial ledgers right here in this bag. We can review them tonight. I can show you the profit margins. I brought a business proposal that will generate excellent revenue for your holding company. We just need to sit down in the lounge and discuss the loan terms. Family helps family, right? Richard waited for a response. He expected the traditional dynamic of men discussing business while the women stepped aside. Julianne did not move. He did not speak. He did not even look at Richard. My husband kept his dark eyes focused entirely on me. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, projecting an aura of quiet, untouchable authority. By refusing to acknowledge my father, Julian stripped Richard of every single ounce of dignity he possessed. Julian demonstrated to everyone present that I held the only key to the kingdom. My father's corporate survival depended entirely on the daughter he had treated like garbage for 31 years. Richard swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing a line down his pale forehead despite the evening chill. He realized Julian would not save him. He realized I was the executioner. Susan sensed the shifting tide. She resorted to her favorite tactic. She played the victim. Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling over her thick mascara. "How can you do this to us?" Susan sobbed, gripping the iron bars. "We are your flesh and blood. You are breaking your father's heart. We drove all the way here to bring you a wedding present. Family is family, Emily. You cannot just lock us out in the cold. You owe us your respect." The gaslighting was breathtaking, but it no longer worked. I reached into a small silk pouch hanging from my wrist. I pulled out my mobile phone. I did not argue with her logic. I did not list the decades of abuse. I simply swiped the screen, navigated to my audio files, and selected the folder labeled Wedding Day. I turned the volume to the highest setting. I held the device out toward the security guards, ensuring David and his staff could hear every single word clearly. I pressed play. Susan's own voice echoed out of the small speaker, shrill and dripping with venom. "You are nothing. You have always been nothing but a bitter, mediocre disappointment. Since you refuse to act like a daughter, I refuse to be your mother. You are formally disowned. Nobody from this family will be attending your pathetic little party. You are dead to this family." The recording clicked off. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush stone. The security guards exchanged sideways glances, their expressions hardening as they looked at my mother. Susan stood frozen. The fake tears dried up instantly. Her jaw hung open, her face draining of all color. She could not claim the audio was fake. She could not spin the narrative. The ugly, undeniable truth hung in the air for the whole world to witness. I lowered the phone and slipped it back into my pouch. "You disowned me 3 days ago," I said. My voice remained steady, echoing like a gavel striking wood. "You told me I was dead. You do not get to claim me today just because you saw a bank account." The humiliation was public, severe, and absolute. My father stared at his scuffed dress shoes, the heavy leather briefcase hanging uselessly from his hand. His shoulders slumped, the weight of his impending bankruptcy breaking his spine. My mother covered her mouth with her hand, realizing she had permanently severed the only lifeline they had left. They had nothing left to say. The logic was airtight. They made their choice, and now they were locked outside the gates of a life they desperately wanted to infiltrate. I felt a sudden, profound sense of closure. The battle was over. I had won. I turned my body ready to walk back up the driveway with my husband and enjoy the rest of our beautiful reception. But the night was not finished. A sharp, shrill voice cut through the tension. Bella shoved her way to the front of the gate, nearly knocking Susan over. My younger sister gripped the iron bars, her knuckles turning stark white. She glared at me, her eyes burning with a furious, unhinged jealousy. "You think you are so special," Bella sneered, her voice shaking with rage. "You think because Julian has some money, you are better than us? You are not. Derek is 10 times the man your husband is. Derek is a senior vice president. He handles high-level accounts on Wall Street. We do not need your stupid handouts. My engagement party is going to be flawless because my fiancé actually knows how to treat a woman." She held up her left hand, waving the 4-carat diamond ring in the yellow security light, clinging desperately to the only victory she thought she still possessed. I watched Bella flaunt her ring, feeling a strange twinge of pity mixed with anticipation. She thought Derek was her golden ticket. She thought her future was secure. Julian finally moved. He took one slow step forward, closing the distance to the gate. He looked down at Bella, his expression devoid of any warmth or mercy. He reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a folded piece of heavy corporate stationery. The air grew instantly colder. Bella stopped waving her hand. The smug smile slid off her face as she looked at the paper Julian held. The ultimate twist was about to drop, and Bella's perfect illusion was seconds away from a catastrophic collision with reality. The yellow security lights buzzed softly overhead, casting long shadows across the decorative gravel. Julian stood near the iron gates, holding the folded piece of heavy corporate stationery. He did not rush to unfold it. He let the silence stretch, allowing Bella to marinate in her own foolish arrogance. My sister stood on the other side of the metal bars, her chest heaving with exertion. She kept her left hand raised, making sure the 4-carat diamond caught the artificial glow. She believed that ring was her ultimate shield. Throughout our entire childhood, Bella evaluated human worth based solely on retail price tags. If she owned the most expensive toy, she was the winner. If her vacation cost more than my tuition, she felt superior. She looked at Julian, a man she assumed was a struggling clerk, and sneered. "Derek is a powerhouse," Bella declared, her voice echoing down the empty access road. "He manages offshore accounts for elite clients. He is untouchable in the financial sector. He told me you manage a few strip malls, Julian. You are nothing compared to him. He is going to give me the life I deserve." Julian watched her with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a predictable insect. He slowly unfolded the thick paper. He held it up, keeping it just out of her reach. "Your fiancé does not work on Wall Street," Julian stated quietly. His tone carried no anger, only a chilling, surgical precision. Bella scoffed, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "You are just jealous." Julian lowered his gaze to the document. "Derek Vance is currently employed, or rather was employed, as a mid-level accounts payable supervisor. He worked at a regional logistics branch located in a suburban office park. He sits in a gray cubicle on the 2nd floor. His annual salary is $85,000. Susan gasped, taking a sudden step backward. Richard frowned, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "That is a lie," Bella snapped, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "Derek is a senior vice president. He took me to Aspen. He buys me designer clothes. He drives a European sports car. He leases a European sports car," Julian corrected smoothly. "And he manages to pay for those trips by utilizing a very old, very careless accounting trick." I stood beside my husband, feeling a cold shiver trace its way down my spine. I knew Derek was a fraud, but I did not anticipate the sheer depth of his deception. Derek had spent the last 2 years attending our family holidays, wearing tailored suits and lecturing my father on high-yield investments. Richard had swallowed every single word, handing Derek tens of thousands of dollars in supposed seed capital. Julian stepped a few inches closer to the gate. 2 days ago, my internal auditing division conducted a routine quarterly review of all regional subsidiaries. They flagged a series of unusual discrepancies originating from Derek's department. Bella lowered her hand. The smug, victorious smile began to melt off her face, replaced by a creeping, dreadful uncertainty. She looked back at Susan for reassurance, but our mother was staring at Julian with wide, terrified eyes. Derek created a fictitious vendor account in our supply chain database, Julian explained, keeping his voice even and relentless.
He generated fake invoices for warehouse materials that never existed. He approved those invoices himself, bypassing the standard two-party verification system. He wired the funds directly into a private escrow account under his own name.
The night air grew incredibly still. The jazz music from my reception felt a million miles away. Over the past 4 weeks, Julianne continued, Derek embezzled exactly $45,000 from Sterling Holdings. Bella shook her head side to side, her breathing turning shallow and rapid. No, she whispered. No, he is wealthy. His family has money. His family declared bankruptcy a decade ago, Julianne countered. Derek is drowning in consumer debt. My forensic accountants traced the stolen funds immediately. Do you want to know where the money went, Bella? My sister did not answer. She could not speak. Her skin turned the color of old parchment. Julianne looked directly at the sparkling stone on her left hand. $30,000 was wired to a high-end jeweler in Aspen, Colorado, to purchase that ring. The remaining $15,000 was transferred yesterday morning to the Oak Grove Country Club to secure a premium date for an engagement party. The revelation dropped like a concrete block. The stunning piece of jewelry Bella had shoved in my face, the ring she used to prove her undeniable superiority, was nothing but stolen corporate property. The bribe Derek used to try and steal my wedding venue was funded by money he stole from my husband. Derek had robbed Julian to pay for Bella's illusion. You are wearing criminal evidence on your finger, Julian murmured. Bella stumbled backward, her thin stiletto heels twisting in the loose dirt. She looked at her hand as if a poisonous spider had just crawled across her knuckles. She tried to pull the ring off her fingers, trembling so badly she could barely grasp the metal band. This cannot be happening, Bella sobbed, her voice breaking into a fragile, high-pitched whine. He told me he was a partner. He promised me a mansion in the Hamptons. Julian folded the paper and slipped it back into his tuxedo jacket. Yesterday afternoon, my security personnel escorted Derek Vance out of his cubicle. I terminated his employment contract effectively immediately. Richard let out a low, guttural groan. My father squeezed his eyes shut, realizing the man he trusted with his own borrowed capital was a common thief. Richard had handed his remaining business equity to a con artist who was now entirely exposed. It gets worse for him, Julianne added, offering no mercy to the people standing in the dirt. I do not tolerate theft within my organization. My legal department filed formal charges with the state prosecutor this morning. The authorities executed an arrest warrant at Derek's leased apartment 3 hours ago. Your wealthy fiancé is currently sitting in a county holding cell, waiting for a bail hearing he cannot afford. The golden child shattered. The pristine, perfect reality Bella had constructed for herself evaporated into the cold night air. Her entire identity relied on being better than me. She needed the wealthiest partner, the most expensive clothes, and the grandest parties to feel validated. She had spent the last 2 days gloating about her superior life, parading around my parents' house and demanding they cancel my wedding to honor her new status. Now she was engaged to a broke, unemployed felon facing severe jail time. Bella let out a jagged, agonizing wail. Her knees buckled, the cheap fabric of her bright red gown bunched around her waist as she collapsed onto the decorative gravel. She dropped to the ground, no longer caring about ruining her shoes or dirtying her dress. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving with loud, ugly sobs. Susan rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside her favorite daughter. Susan wrapped her arms around Bella, trying to hush her cries, but the damage was irreversible. Susan looked up at me, her face streaked with dark trails of ruined makeup. She opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to demand I fix the situation, perhaps to beg for another handout. But the words died in her throat. She finally understood that the daughter she discarded was untouchable, while the daughter she worshipped was sitting in the dirt holding stolen property. I stood behind the iron gate watching the karma unfold with devastating precision. I did not feel the urge to run out and comfort them. I did not feel the familiar toxic guilt that used to force me to apologize for their mistakes. I just felt a quiet, enduring relief. The heavy burden of their expectations slipped off my shoulders forever. I looked at my father. Richard had not rushed to comfort Bella. He remained standing near the stone pillar, his knuckles white as he gripped the handle of his leather briefcase. He stared at Julian, his breathing shallow and erratic. Derek was gone. The fake Wall Street savior was locked in a jail cell. Richard was the only one left standing, holding a briefcase full of bad debts, predatory loans, and failing profit margins. He knew Julian owned his commercial notes. He knew foreclosure was imminent. Richard took a hesitant, trembling step toward the iron bars. He let the briefcase slide from his hand. It hit the gravel with a dull thud. He looked at me, stripping away the final layers of his false pride, preparing to beg for the only thing he actually cared about. The yellow security lamps cast long, sharp shadows across the gravel shoulder of the access road. The dust settled around my sister. Bella remained crumpled on the ground, weeping over a stolen diamond and a fraudulent future that vanished into thin air. My mother knelt beside her in a cheap sequin dress, whispering useless comforts into the cool night air. But my father did not look at his favorite daughter. Richard Brooks only possessed one true love in this world, and it was not sitting in the dirt. His true love was his public image, his regional hardware stores, and his perceived wealth, and all of it was currently evaporating before his very eyes. Richard let the heavy leather briefcase slip from his sweaty fingers. It landed on the decorative stones with a dull, hollow thud. He stepped closer to the tall iron gate. The arrogant patriarch who had commanded me to cancel my wedding was gone. In his place stood a broken, terrified debtor. He gripped the cold metal bars, his knuckles pale under the harsh lights. He ignored me entirely, directing his desperate, pleading gaze toward the man he had spent 2 years insulting. Julian Richard pleaded, his voice cracking under the staggering weight of his impending ruin. "Please, son. We can figure this out. You are a businessman. I am a businessman. We understand how capital works. Sometimes the market fluctuates. Sometimes we have to leverage our assets to maintain our market share. I just need a little more time to restructure my accounts." Julian did not flinch. He did not offer a comforting smile. He remained perfectly still, a silent, imposing guardian standing by my side. Richard swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. "We are family now," Richard continued, his tone growing increasingly frantic. "You married my daughter today. Family helps family through difficult financial seasons. If you just halt the collection process on those commercial loans, I can draft a new repayment schedule. I will give you equity in the supply stores. Just tell your executives to call off the foreclosure." I listened to the man who skipped my college graduation beg for a corporate bailout. He used the word family as a transactional token, a cheap currency he only spent when he needed to buy his own survival. He expected Julian to wave a magic wand and erase the consequences of his greed. He expected the traditional dynamic of men making high-level deals while the women stayed quiet in the background. I did not stay quiet. I stepped forward, inserting myself directly between my father and my husband. I looked Richard Brooks dead in the eye. "Julian is not going to review your ledgers," I stated. My voice rang out clear and cold, cutting through the ambient noise of Bella crying. "He is not going to negotiate a new repayment schedule with you. You are talking to the wrong person." Richard blinked, his expression twisting in deep confusion. "Emily, please stay out of this," he scolded instinctively, unable to drop his condescending habit even while begging for his life. "This is complex corporate finance. You do not understand the mechanics of these high-yield commercial notes." "I understand them perfectly," I replied, keeping my posture rigid. "I understand that your profit margins collapsed 3 years ago. I understand that you took out predatory short-term capital advances with 25% interest rates. I understand that you bundled those toxic loans and leveraged your flagship store to secure the cash." The remaining color drained from my father's face. His jaw slackened. He stared at me as if I had just sprouted a second head. I did not stop there. I stepped closer to the gate, letting 31 years of suppressed truth spill out into the open night air. I saw the internal financial dossier I told him, watching his eyes widen in pure terror. I saw the wire transfers. You did not inject that borrowed capital into your hardware stores. You did not use the funds to pay your struggling vendors or upgrade your inventory. You took the money you borrowed from Sterling Commercial Credit and funneled it directly into Bella's bank account. You financed her European vacations. You funded her designer wardrobe. You handed $70,000 to a con artist because Derek promised you a quick return on a fake startup. Richard opened his mouth to defend himself, but no sound emerged. The grand illusion of his self-made wealth was stripped away, leaving nothing but a desperate, reckless gambler holding a losing hand. You even took out a second mortgage on the house I grew up in. I continued, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. You risked the roof over your own head just to make sure Bella never had to hear the word no. You spent my entire childhood lecturing me on fiscal responsibility. You called me a failure for choosing a modest career. Meanwhile, you were burning your own empire to the ground just to keep up appearances. Emily, you have to understand, Richard whispered, his voice trembling. I had to maintain our status. I had to provide for your sister. She expects a certain standard of living. I stared at the pathetic shell of a man standing on the other side of the iron bars. He still justified his financial suicide. He still believed Bella's comfort was worth more than his own integrity. I made you a silent promise 3 days ago, I told him. When I discovered Julian owned your debt, I decided to give you one final test. I decided that if you showed up today, if you walked me down the aisle and acted like a real father, I would ask Julian to restructure your loans. I was prepared to help you save your business. Richard gasped, his hands gripping the metal bars so tightly his fingers shook. But you failed, I said. You told me my wedding was just a party. You told me not to be selfish. You discarded me for a networking event. I paused, letting the crushing reality of his choices settle over him. You chose her comfort over my existence for 31 years, I stated. The words felt like a heavy stone lifting off my chest, dropping squarely onto his shoulders. Now you can rely on her to pay your debts. Richard let out a strangled, agonizing cry. He turned his head, looking down at Bella. His golden child was covered in dirt, weeping over a fake engagement to a jailed felon. She possessed no income. She held no valuable assets. She could not save him. The savior he nurtured was entirely useless, and the scapegoat he threw away was holding the keys to the kingdom. Julian finally spoke, his deep voice slicing through the cool evening breeze. Sterling Holdings will not be extending any grace periods, Julian informed my father. We do not negotiate with individuals who default on their obligations. Your commercial notes are due in full. Our legal department will initiate the formal foreclosure process on your hardware stores and your residential property on Monday morning at 9 o'clock. The finality of Julian's decree hung heavy in the air. There would be no secret backroom deals. There would be no mercy. The financial guillotine had dropped. A sudden, piercing shriek shattered the silence. Susan sprang up from the gravel, leaving Bella crying in the dirt. My mother rushed to the gate, her face contorted in a mask of pure, unhinged fury. She slammed her hands against the iron bars, glaring at me with a hatred so deep it made my blood run cold. You did this, Susan screamed, her voice echoing down the dark driveway. You planned this entire trap to destroy us. You are stealing our house. You are taking your father's business. You are ruining our lives out of petty spite. How can you sleep at night knowing you left your own family destitute? I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked at the woman who had formally disowned me over a voicemail just 72 hours ago. I looked at the mother who had tried to bribe a venue manager to cancel my wedding. I didn't ruin anything. I responded coldly. I kept my expression entirely neutral, denying her the emotional reaction she craved. I just stopped being your human shield. You ruined yourselves." I turned away from the gate. I looked at David, the head of private security. He stood tall, waiting for my final instruction. "Remove these trespassers," I commanded. David nodded respectfully. He raised a hand, signaling the uniformed guards stationed nearby. The security team moved forward with swift, professional efficiency. They unlatched the pedestrian side gate and stepped out onto the access road. They surrounded my parents and my sister, forming an impenetrable wall of dark suits to escort them off the property. 3 months passed. The warm Connecticut summer faded into a bitter, biting autumn. The leaves turned brown and fell away, leaving the trees exposed to the cold wind. My life underwent a similar season of exposure, stripping away the heavy burdens of my past to reveal a solid, enduring foundation. I spent those months traveling with my husband, enjoying a long honeymoon across the Italian coast. When we returned home, the dust had finally settled over the ruins of the Brooks family. Richard always believed he was the smartest man in any room. He assumed his local hardware empire granted him immunity from the rules governing ordinary people. He was wrong. Exactly on schedule, Julian's legal team filed the necessary paperwork to collect on the defaulted commercial notes. The county sheriff arrived at the flagship supply center on a Tuesday morning. The armed deputies did not care about my father's golf handicap or his previous community awards. They only cared about the court order in their hands. They ordered his employees to vacate the premises immediately. My cousin Sarah watched the event unfold from across the street. She told me Richard stood on the cracked asphalt of the parking lot, watching men in heavy work boots change the locks on doors he had opened every morning for 2 decades. The bank seized his remaining inventory to cover the outstanding debts. His business accounts were frozen. His vendors filed secondary lawsuits for unpaid invoices. Richard was forced to declare Chapter 7 bankruptcy. He sat in a sterile courtroom, raising his right hand to swear under oath that he was entirely broke. Susan experienced her own unique version of hell. In her world, perception meant everything. She derived her life force from the envy of her neighbors, but the country club incident shattered her carefully cultivated facade. Thomas Harrison, the venue manager, felt deeply insulted by the bribery attempt. He shared the sordid details with the club board members. The story leaked into the surrounding wealthy suburbs. Everyone quickly learned that Susan tried to hijack a wedding date using dirty money. The social execution was swift and merciless. Susan drove her least luxury sedan to her long-standing Tuesday book club. She walked up the brick pathway, holding a platter of expensive baked goods. When she rang the doorbell, the hostess opened the heavy wooden door just a few inches. The woman did not invite Susan inside. She looked at my mother with cold, naked pity, stating that the group preferred to associate with people of high moral character. The door shut softly in Susan's face. My mother walked back to her car, alone, carrying her untouched pastries, realizing her social currency was completely worthless. Bella suffered the most spectacular crash. Her grand illusion of marrying a Wall Street titan evaporated the moment a state investigator knocked on her bedroom door. The detective presented a search warrant regarding Derek's corporate embezzlement. During the formal inquiry, the authorities traced the stolen funds directly to the jewelry store in Aspen. A female police officer instructed Bella to hand over the 4-carat diamond ring. Sarah said Bella threw a massive tantrum in the precinct lobby, screaming that she was an innocent victim. The officer simply held out a plastic evidence bag, threatening to add obstruction charges if she refused to comply. Bella slid the ring off her finger, dropping the only symbol of her superiority into a cheap plastic pouch. Derek pleaded guilty to felony fraud to avoid a lengthy trial. He was transferred to a state correctional facility, leaving Bella with a tarnished reputation and a mountain of unpaid credit card debt. The sprawling colonial house I grew up in was auctioned off to satisfy the remaining creditors. My parents had to pack 30 years of accumulated possessions into cardboard boxes. They rented a small, cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a decaying industrial neighborhood located right next to a noisy highway. Bella, lacking any employable skills or higher education, had no choice but to move into the tiny 2nd bedroom. They were confined to a space smaller than their former garage. Without me there to absorb their constant rage, the toxicity bounced off the thin apartment walls and hit them instead. Sarah visited them once to drop off some groceries. She described a living nightmare. Richard sat on a cheap sofa, blaming Susan for enabling Bella's reckless spending habits. Susan paced the narrow kitchen, screaming at Richard for being a terrible provider who lost their family home. Bella stayed locked in her small bedroom, crying over old photographs and blaming her parents for introducing her to a convicted felon. They were trapped in a miserable prison of their own making. They spent their days shouting at one another, suffocating under the weight of their collective failures. Every time they looked at each other, they saw the reflection of their own terrible choices. I sat on the terrace of the beautiful new home Julian and I purchased, drinking hot tea, while looking out over the rolling green hills. A profound sense of tranquility washed over my soul. I did not orchestrate this destruction. I did not plant evidence in Derek's cubicle. I did not force my father to sign those predatory loan agreements. I did not instruct my mother to act like an arrogant social climber. I just stopped participating in their delusions. When you stop catching the knives toxic people throw, they eventually drop the blades on their own feet. I removed my financial and emotional support, allowing gravity to do the heavy lifting. The law, the free market, and karma handled the rest. The bullies who spent my entire life trying to make me feel small had finally shrunk themselves down to nothing. The storm was over. The wreckage was cleared away. I took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air, turning my attention toward the future. The nightmare was firmly in the past, and a beautiful, unexpected new chapter was just beginning to unfold, right inside my own home. The morning sun warmed the smooth stone tiles of our back terrace. I sat in a comfortable wicker chair, resting my hands lightly over the gentle swell of my stomach. I was 6 months pregnant with our first child, a little girl. Julian walked out through the wide sliding glass doors, carrying a silver tray with 2 ceramic mugs. He set my decaffeinated herbal tea on the small wooden table beside me and pressed a soft kiss to the top of my head. He took the empty seat next to mine, opening the morning newspaper. The only sound in our spacious backyard was the gentle rustling of the mature oak trees and the distant, cheerful chirping of robins. I looked at my husband, feeling a profound, overwhelming wave of gratitude wash over my entire body. A year ago, my mornings began with a tight, heavy knot of anxiety buried deep inside my chest. I used to wake up checking my cellular phone, mentally bracing myself for Susan's passive-aggressive demands or Richard's condescending financial lectures. I spent 3 decades functioning as a human shock absorber for a family that viewed my emotional pain as an acceptable price for their daily comfort. Now I woke up to quiet mornings, genuine affection, and a strong partner who viewed my peace of mind as his absolute top priority. People in our modern society often push the concept of unconditional forgiveness. Whenever extended relatives or casual acquaintances hear about family estrangement, they are incredibly quick to offer unsolicited advice. Aunt Martha tried calling me a few months ago, leaving a tearful, manipulative voicemail demanding I reach out to my parents. She said family is everything, and holding a grudge is a toxic trait. She told me Richard was deeply depressed over his bankruptcy, and Susan cried every single day in her cramped, noisy apartment. Martha insisted I owed them a second chance because they gave me life and raised me under their roof. I deleted Martha's message without responding. I realized a long time ago that society frequently confuses setting healthy boundaries with seeking malicious revenge. Walking away from an abusive, one-sided dynamic is not a punishment. It is a necessary act of survival. My parents are not experiencing genuine remorse. If Julian worked as a grocery store manager, my mother and father would never have left a single crying voicemail on my device. They would have gladly attended Bella's lavish engagement party on my wedding day and laughed with their wealthy friends about my cheap, pathetic reception. Their current tears have absolutely nothing to do with losing a beloved daughter. They are crying because they lost an automated teller machine. They are mourning the death of their financial safety net and the total collapse of their fragile social image. You do not owe forgiveness to people who are only sorry that their terrible actions finally produced real consequences. Forgiveness is a beautiful healing concept when the offending party actually acknowledges their wrongdoing and takes concrete steps to change their destructive behavior. But forcing yourself to forgive people who actively continue to manipulate you is just another form of self-harm. I refuse to teach my unborn daughter that she must tolerate disrespect just because the person hurting her happens to share her genetic code. I am going to raise her in a home where love is a constant, reliable reality, not a conditional reward handed out for good behavior. She will never have to shrink herself to make someone else feel tall. Julian and I will be her shield, just like Catherine and Julian became a shield for me. If you are watching this video right now, I want to take a moment to speak directly to you. Maybe you are sitting on your own couch, holding your phone, feeling that heavy, familiar ache in your chest. Maybe you are the designated scapegoat in your family tree. You are the one who always tried to keep the peace. You swallowed your pride, canceled your important plans, and apologized for things you never did, just to avoid another massive screaming match. You watched your parents shower a golden child with endless praise and unearned financial support, while you were left to figure out life entirely on your own. And when you finally decided you had endured enough, when you finally stood up and asked for basic human respect, they called you dramatic. They called you petty and jealous. They launched a vicious smear campaign, spinning a web of elaborate lies to make sure everyone in your extended family viewed you as the villain. They played the victim so perfectly that you actually started to question your own sanity. I see you. I know exactly how much that betrayal hurts. I know how deeply it cuts when the people who are supposed to protect you become the very people you need protection from. But I also want you to know the absolute truth. You are not the problem. You were never the problem. You were simply convenient. Toxic families desperately need a dumping ground for their dysfunction. They need someone to carry the blame so they can continue pretending they are flawless. They chose you because you were strong enough to carry the heavy weight they refused to shoulder. You cannot earn love from people who are fiercely committed to misunderstanding you. You cannot fix a family dynamic that relies on your continuous suffering to function smoothly. The hardest lesson I ever had to learn was that my parents were never going to change. No amount of money, career success, or blind obedience was ever going to transform Richard and Susan into loving, supportive parents. The exact moment I accepted that painful reality was the exact moment I reclaimed my entire life. You do not have to set yourself on fire to keep toxic people warm. You have the absolute right to pack up your love and walk away from any table where respect is no longer being served. You have the right to build a new table, surrounded by people who celebrate your victories instead of sabotaging them. The family you create, whether through deep friendships, supportive mentors, or a loving spouse, is infinitely more valuable than the family you were born into by mere biological chance. Do not let anyone convince you that enduring abuse is a noble family tradition. My name is Emily Sterling. I am 31 years old. I survived 3 decades of emotional neglect, and I emerged on the other side with a wonderful husband, a beautiful home, and a baby girl on the way. But my greatest wealth is not found in Julian's corporate bank accounts or the deed to this sprawling property. My greatest wealth is the absolute, unshakable peace I feel when I close my eyes at night knowing I am finally safe and truly valued. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic parent or a golden sibling? How did you find your peace? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and we can all learn so much from sharing our journeys of survival and healing. If my story helped you feel seen today, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. This community grows stronger every time we validate each other. Remember, you deserve to be chosen first. See you in the next video.